The Ocean Majesty gleamed like a jewel under the early morning sun, its white hull slicing through the sapphire waters with effortless grace. Passengers streamed onto the deck, suitcases in tow, smiles wide, hearts light with the promise of escape. Among them, Marissa Kane paused at the gangway, inhaling the salty breeze that carried both freedom and a subtle, unplaceable tension. She had taken this trip for herself, a break from deadlines, from the relentless hum of her investigative work. But something about the atmosphere unsettled her, even before she stepped aboard. Marissa adjusted the strap of her leather bag and scanned the deck. Couples embraced, children squealed at the sight of the pools, and elderly passengers waddled carefully, clutching rails like lifelines. Yet amid the cheer, there was a quiet current of observation, of people watching people, their gestures measured, their smiles slightly forced. It reminded her of a newsroom, but with the stakes replaced by luxury and leisure. Near the helm, Captain Edward Halston stood tall, crisp in his uniform, eyes shielded by dark aviators. His presence exuded authority, the kind that demanded attention without a single word. He greeted a few passengers with practiced charm, his handshakes firm, voice deep and reassuring. To the casual observer, he was the embodiment of safety at sea. But Marissa, attuned to the subtleties of human behavior, noticed the micro-expressions. The brief flicker of irritation when a stewardess approached too closely, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw as he scanned the crowd. As she made her way past the grand atrium, Marissa overheard fragments of hushed conversations. "Did you hear about the captain?" Some people say he favors certain crew members. The words flowed to her ears like smoke, intriguing and faintly dangerous. She felt a pang of curiosity, the kind that had driven her to chase stories that others feared to touch. For a moment, she imagined herself as a detective, piecing together the invisible threads of secrets floating just beneath the polished surface. Her attention shifted to the ship itself. The gleaming polished floors, the rich mahogany rails, and the soft hum of engines beneath the deck. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted from the dining hall, mingling with the brine of the sea. Everywhere, the ship promised elegance and perfection, but perfection often concealed cracks, and Marissa's instincts told her that some of those cracks were not meant to be ignored. A sudden gust of wind pulled at her scarf, and she shivered, not entirely from the cold. She noticed Liam Torres, a young deck officer, assisting a passenger with their luggage. There was an air of nervousness about him, the kind of unease that didn't belong on a vacation. His eyes met hers briefly, and she caught a flicker of recognition, or was it warning? She couldn't tell. As Marissa stepped onto the main deck, the ship's horn echoed across the harbor, announcing the start of the voyage. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and she joined, clapping along, heart racing. She knew, deep down, that this journey would be unlike any other. Behind the glimmering lights, the laughter, and the champagne toasts, something darker lurked, waiting to be uncovered, and she would find it. The evening settled over the Ocean Majesty like a velvet curtain, painting the decks in shades of amber and shadow. Passengers wandered the promenades, laughter and clinking glasses echoing against the polished wood. But Marissa moved quietly, absorbing the atmosphere with a keen eye. Something about the ship after dark felt different, more intimate, more revealing. The cheerful illusion of the day had shifted, and the undercurrents she had glimpsed during embarkation were now growing louder, subtler, like a pulse she could almost feel in the walls. Marissa paused outside the grand staircase, overhearing two crew members whispering in hurried tones. "I told you, no one can know," hissed one, a stewardess with carefully pinned hair. "You think anyone will notice?" replied another, a young man whose hand shook slightly as he adjusted his uniform. Marissa's pulse quickened. She had no idea what they were talking about, but the anxiety in their voices suggested that whatever it was serious. She scribbled the words in her notebook, her instincts telling her to watch closely, to listen even closer. Moving down a dimly lit corridor, she noticed a familiar figure, a deck officer from earlier, Liam Torres, pausing outside a storage room. His eyes darted toward the stairwell, then back to the door, as if expecting someone. Marissa slowed her pace, pretending to admire the framed nautical charts lining the hallway, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden just out of view. The ship's hum seemed louder here, echoing in the narrow hallways, bouncing off polished walls and gilded frames. Every creak of the floorboards made her heart skip a beat. The passengers she passed were absorbed in their own worlds, oblivious to the tension simmering just beneath the surface. She realized that the ship itself was a character in this story, a vessel of secrets, carrying people who were all, knowingly or unknowingly, part of a complicated web. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft cough. Turning, she found herself facing Sofia Delgado, a stewardess she had noticed earlier serving champagne at the deck party. Sofia's posture was stiff, her eyes flicking nervously to the side. "You're new, aren't you?" Sofia whispered, a faint tremor in her voice. "Something like that," Marissa replied cautiously, studying her expression. "You look like you've seen more than most." Sofia's gaze dropped. I suppose you could say that," she muttered, then quickly walked away before Marissa could ask more. But the brief encounter left an impression, a subtle, fragile thread of unease that Marissa could feel tightening around her chest. Later, near the aft deck, Marissa caught sight of Captain Halston again. He was speaking quietly with a man she didn't recognize, their faces close, smiles fleeting and almost forced. Halston's hand rested lightly on the man's shoulder, the gesture casual yet deliberate, a silent assertion of control. Marissa noted the tension in the captain's posture, the brief tightening of his jaw, details that most passengers would overlook but that screamed volumes to her trained eye. Back in her cabin, Marissa flipped through her journal, writing down every detail, every snippet of conversation she had overheard. The whispers, the furtive glances, the hidden conversations, all pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet fully understand. She felt the familiar thrill of curiosity mixed with a flicker of unease. There was a story here, she knew, and it was bigger than she had anticipated. As she closed her journal and gazed out at the darkened ocean, she noticed a single light flickering in one of the upper decks. Too high for a passenger cabin, too solitary for the crew lounge. A shiver ran down her spine. The ship seemed alive in the night, its secrets pressing against the walls, daring her to uncover them. And Marissa knew she would. The hum of the engines and the distant laughter of passengers carried her into the night. But sleep did not come easily, because soon someone aboard the Ocean Majesty would vanish, and she would witness the first cracks in the illusion she had boarded with. The night air on the Ocean Majesty had grown heavy, scented with salt and distant storm clouds. Most passengers had retreated to their cabins or the late-night lounges, lulled by the rhythmic rocking of the ship. Marissa, however, could not sleep. She paced her cabin, flipping through her journal, replaying the whispers, the furtive glances, the tension she had observed throughout the day. Her instincts screamed that the ship was more than just a vessel of luxury. It was a stage, and something sinister was already unfolding behind the polished doors. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it cautiously, expecting a late-night inquiry from housekeeping. Instead, she saw Liam Torres, the young deck officer. His uniform was slightly rumpled, and there was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't noticed before. "Are you alone?" he asked, his voice low and hurried. "I am," Marissa replied, though her pulse quickened. "What's going on?" He glanced around nervously, then leaned in. "Something happened tonight, in the storage area near the lower decks. You shouldn't go alone, but you should see it." Curiosity outweighed caution. Marissa followed Liam through dimly lit corridors that seemed narrower in the dark, the hum of the engines vibrating beneath their feet. The walls glistened faintly from condensation, casting shadows that twisted like silent observers. The further they descended, the colder it became, the air heavier, as though it was saturated with secrets waiting to be uncovered. When they reached the storage area, the door was slightly ajar. Liam gestured for Marissa to step inside. The room was sparsely lit, crates and supplies stacked in neat rows, the metallic scent of machinery lingering in the air. And then they saw it, a uniformed crew member, Javier, lying face down, his body motionless. Panic seized Marissa as she rushed forward, but Liam held her back. "He's gone," Liam whispered, almost to himself. "He was here earlier, and now he just vanished." Marissa's mind raced. How could someone disappear from a locked storage area without leaving a trace? She examined the crates. The floor, the small ventilation ducts. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of a struggle. Nothing to suggest where Javier could have gone. The unease settled deep in her chest, a visceral recognition that the ordinary rules of the ship no longer applied. A distant metallic clang echoed through the corridor, making Marissa jump. Liam's face hardened. You need to be careful. Things are happening tonight. Things people will try to cover up. Marissa's investigative instincts kicked into overdrive. She scribbled notes in her journal, capturing every detail. The locked storage area, the absence of evidence, the eerie feeling of the ship itself watching. She realized, with chilling clarity, that the whispers she had overheard were only the beginning. Someone aboard the Ocean Majesty was orchestrating events behind the scenes. And now, one person had vanished without explanation. As they exited the storage room, Marissa noticed the corridor lights flicker, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. She caught a glimpse of Captain Halston at the far end, his figure still and authoritative, his eyes scanning the hall as if measuring their every move. For a moment, their gazes locked. A shiver ran down her spine. He smiled, faint and polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something in that smile, something carefully constructed, something dangerous. Marissa returned to her cabin that night, her thoughts a storm as dark as the ocean outside. The first vanishing had occurred, and the illusion of safety aboard the ship had shattered. She felt the weight of the journal in her hands, the quiet certainty that the story she had stumbled upon would be far darker than she had ever imagined. And as she stared at the moonlit waves beyond her window, she realized this was only the beginning. The Ocean Majesty felt different below deck, cooler, quieter, and strangely oppressive. The scent of engine oil mingled with polished wood, and the dim lighting cast long, shifting shadows that made the walls seem alive. Marissa moved cautiously, her footsteps muffled against the thick carpeting, her journal clutched tightly in one hand. She had resolved to investigate the whispers and the first vanishing, to understand what force lurked beneath the gleaming surface of the cruise. She passed rows of supply rooms and staff quarters, noticing how the crew moved with a mix of efficiency and apprehension. Each glance, each slight gesture seemed charged with hidden meaning. Something was being concealed, and the vanishing of Javier had only scratched the surface. Marissa stopped outside a storage hatch that appeared ordinary at first glance. But as she leaned closer, she noticed a small stack of letters tucked into the corner, partially hidden behind cleaning supplies. She pulled them out carefully, scanning the elegant, looping handwriting. The letters were intimate, filled with words of longing, secrecy, and subtle manipulation, between Captain Edward Halston and someone she now recognized as Sofia Delgado, the stewardess who had brushed past her earlier in the halls. Her pulse quickened. The letters revealed the outlines of a hidden relationship, covert meetings, late-night rendezvous, promises that skirted the boundaries of morality. But what struck Marissa most was the tone. Sofia seemed trapped, her words alternating between longing and desperation. Halston's language, by contrast, was controlled, deliberate, and persuasive. Each letter was a thread in a web, connecting power, desire, and coercion in a way that made Marissa's skin crawl. Marissa's attention was drawn to a faint creaking sound behind a row of crates. Heart pounding. She edged closer, careful not to knock anything over. Peering around the corner, she saw Sofia herself, leaning against the wall, eyes distant and haunted, clutching a folder of documents. Sofia's shoulders shook as if she were holding back tears. "You shouldn't be here," Sofia whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the hum of the engines. "I could say the same to you," Marissa replied softly, careful not to alarm her. "I just want to understand. You don't have to explain everything, just enough to know it's real." Sofia hesitated, then slowly began to reveal the truth. The captain's charm masked manipulative, controlling nature. Their affair had started months ago, under the guise of mentorship and opportunity, but it had become something darker. Sofia's life was entangled with Halston's in ways she could not escape, and the disappearance of Javier earlier was no coincidence. It was a warning, a demonstration of what happened to those who threatened to reveal the truth. Marissa's mind raced. The story was far bigger than she had imagined. This was not simply about a forbidden romance. It It was a network of control, secrecy, and intimidation that affected both crew and passengers. And if the captain was willing to manipulate those closest to him, what lengths would he go to protect his secret? A loud clang echoed from the upper decks, startling both women. Sofia flinched. "They'll be looking for me now," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Be careful. He notices everything." Marissa nodded, heart hammering. She tucked the letters and Sofia's warnings into her journal, knowing they were the first tangible evidence she had uncovered. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, but she also knew that backing down now would leave the story untold and the danger unchallenged. As she retraced her steps to the main corridors, the ship's hum and low creaks fell heavier, almost sentient. Shadows danced along the walls, and Marissa sensed that each corner, each hidden hatch, could conceal another secret, another danger waiting to surface. By the time she returned to her cabin, Marissa realized the full gravity of her discovery. The captain's hidden affair was not merely a romantic indiscretion. It was a central thread weaving together the fear, manipulation, and vanishings that now plagued the ship. And above deck, the Ocean Majesty continued to glide gracefully across the waves, oblivious to the storm of secrets churning just beneath its polished exterior. The horizon darkened in the late afternoon, the sun swallowed by thick, rolling clouds. The once calming swell of the ocean grew restless, waves lashing against the hull of the Ocean Majesty, their spray stinging exposed skin and carrying with them the salty tang of foreboding. Passengers began to retreat indoors, the laughter from earlier replaced by uneasy murmurs. Marissa stood on the promenade deck, wind whipping her hair, her journal pressed against her chest, watching the sky as tension settled like a weight in her chest. Below deck, the crew scrambled. Orders were shouted over the roar of the engines, equipment clanged, and the captain's voice cut through the chaos with commanding authority that left no room for hesitation. Yet even from a distance, Marissa could sense a subtle tension in him. Halston's usual controlled demeanor was punctuated by flickers of irritation, as though the storm had brought more than just turbulent seas. The first minor accidents occurred almost immediately. A stack of supplies toppled in the lower cargo hold, narrowly missing a crew member. A panicked passenger slipped on the slick deck, prompting murmurs of carelessness and accident. Though Marissa noted the precision of the timing, it was too convenient, too calculated. Her instincts screamed that the storm was amplifying something already sinister. Marissa retreated to one of the quieter observation lounges, where she noticed crew members whispering in corners. Liam Torres was there, hunched over, scanning the ship's manifest. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he ran his fingers over the pages. Marissa approached cautiously. "They're scared," he said without looking up, his voice low. "People think accidents happen, but it's all too precise, too deliberate. Halston, he doesn't tolerate mistakes." Marissa frowned. "You mean someone is orchestrating this?" Liam swallowed hard. "Or someone's trying to cover it up. Maybe both." The first real signs of chaos emerged as a power fluctuation plunged sections of the ship into temporary darkness. Screams echoed from the corridors, and Marissa instinctively ducked behind a column, her pulse racing. Through the shadows, she glimpsed the captain, his silhouette rigid, moving swiftly and deliberately, directing crew and passengers alike, but always maintaining an eerie calm that seemed almost unnatural against the storm's fury. The evening wore on, and the ship's internal tension mirrored the tempest outside. Arguments flared in the dining halls over spilled drinks and missed reservations. Crew members snapped at each other over miscommunication. Marissa noticed subtle, almost imperceptible glances exchanged between Halston and Sofia, a silent acknowledgement. Tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. She realized that the storm had unearthed not only literal danger, but the hidden psychological currents running through the ship: fear, manipulation, control, and secrecy. Later, she ventured down to the lower decks, compelled to check on the storage areas where the first vanishing had occurred. Shadows danced along the walls in the flickering emergency lights, elongating the shapes of crates and railings into grotesque figures. The air was colder here, heavier, and Marissa felt the oppressive weight of secrets pressing in on her. A sudden clatter behind her made her spin. Liam appeared, eyes wide, as though the darkness itself had tried to swallow him whole. "Something's happening tonight," he whispered, urgency threading through his voice. "We need to be careful. He's watching." Marissa swallowed, her breath shallow. She felt the ship's pulse in her chest, every groan and creak amplified by the storm, every shadow a potential threat. The first vanishing had been a warning. Tonight, with nature and tension conspiring together, she understood that no one was truly safe. From the promenade deck, she could hear the wind howling, waves slamming against the hull with the kind of ferocity that made the ship tremble. Yet above the roar, she heard the faint, controlled voice of Halston directing his crew, a calm amidst the chaos, a predator amidst prey. The storm had become more than a weather event. It was a mirror of the hidden turmoil on board, a catalyst for fear and revelation alike. Marissa returned to her cabin late into the night, soaked and shaken. She set her journal on the desk, opened it, and began to write with trembling hands. Each word captured the storm outside and the storm within the ship. The sea had revealed its power tonight, but more importantly, it had revealed the fragile edges of human control, the cracks and illusion of order, and the depths of Halston's manipulations. And as she finally laid down, exhausted, she knew the storm was far from over. The danger, the secrets, and the vanishings were only beginning. The storm had passed, leaving the Ocean Majesty rocking gently under a sky smeared with the first hints of dawn. The passengers stirred from uneasy sleep, unaware of the events that had transpired below deck the night before. But Marissa could not rest. The echoes of crashing waves and the captain's controlled authorities still haunted her, pressing at the edges of her consciousness. She knew the story was no longer just speculation. It had become urgent, personal, and dangerous. Marissa slipped from her cabin into the corridors, journal in hand. Her steps were quiet, deliberate, as she made her way toward the lower decks. Somewhere along the passage, she saw Sofia Delgado leaning against a railing, the soft glow of emergency lighting illuminating her anxious expression. Sofia flinched when she noticed Marissa, but the fear in her eyes was tempered by a fragile trust. "You came," Sofia whispered, voice barely audible above the hum of the ship. "I need to know," Marissa replied, lowering herself beside her. "Everything you can tell me about him." Her gaze was steady, though her pulse raced. Sofia's hands trembled as she clutched a folded piece of paper to her chest. I shouldn't even be talking to you," she said, her voice cracking. Edward, he notices everything. He controls everything. I thought I could handle it, I really did. But to the accidents, Javier disappearing, I can't ignore it anymore." Marissa listened, heart pounding, as Sofia began to unravel her story. The affair had begun months ago, under the guise of mentorship. Halston had been charming, persuasive, a figure of authority who knew how to exploit weaknesses. "He made me feel chosen," Sofia admitted, voice trembling. "But it was never love, not really. It was control. Every time I tried to step back, there was a consequence. You've seen the vanishing, that's a warning. A message to anyone who might interfere." Marissa took careful notes, her mind racing to piece together the implications. Every word Sofia spoke added layers to the web of manipulation that spanned the crew and, potentially, the passengers. Halston's affair was no private indiscretion. It was a tool of power, a carefully orchestrated mechanism to maintain obedience, fear, and secrecy. Sofia's eyes welled with tears. I thought I could handle it, but I'm trapped. Every glance he gives me, every command, it's all calculated. I can't even trust my own instincts anymore." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "If anyone finds out what I know, I don't want to imagine what could happen." Marissa reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Sofia's arm. "I'll protect what you tell me. But we need to get this out, Sofia. Someone has to know the truth." The weight of the confession settled in the air, thick and suffocating, as Marissa realized the full scope of danger. She had anticipated scandal. She had not anticipated fear so absolute, so immobilizing. The storm from the night before had been nothing compared to the tempest Halston could unleash with a single glance, a single word. A distant clang reverberated through the corridors, startling both women. Sofia flinched, glancing toward the shadowed hallway. He's always watching," she whispered, voice tight with panic. Even now, he could be somewhere seeing us. Marissa nodded, her mind already calculating the next steps. She tucked the letters and Sofia's warnings into her journal. The page is now a ledger of fear, power, and secrets. "We have what we need," she said softly. "We'll be careful, but this story has to be told." Sofia took a shuddering breath, finally releasing some of the tension that had held her hostage. For a moment, the two women simply sat together, the hum of the ship the only sound, each aware that their small alliance could be the difference between exposure and survival. As Marissa rose to leave, she cast one last glance at Sofia. The confession had unlocked a truth more dangerous than she had imagined, and the weight of it pressed on her like the waves against the hull. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the deck in muted gold, a fragile reminder that daybreak offered no safety from the darkness lingering below. And in the shadows, she knew, Halston's watchful presence had not wavered. The morning after Sofia's confession was unnervingly calm. The Ocean Majesty glided over glassy waters, as though the storm of the previous night had been nothing more than a fleeting illusion. But beneath the polished decks and cheerful breakfast chatter, tension simmered like a hidden current. Marissa had scarcely slept, her mind looping over Sofia's words, the letters, and the implications of Halston's manipulations. She knew the captain's control extended beyond the crew. He could reach anyone who threatened to expose him. That afternoon, Marissa noticed a passenger lingering near the observation deck. Daniel Reed, a journalist much like herself, had boarded the cruise with the same casual pretense of leisure. Yet he was anything but sharp-eyed and inquisitive. He had been quietly observing the crew, asking pointed questions under the guise of polite curiosity. Marissa had noted his presence during dinner the night before, but had dismissed it until now. Daniel was holding a small camera, scanning the deck with the precision of someone documenting more than scenery. Marissa's pulse quickened. She recognized the same investigative hunger in him that drove her own instincts. And that meant trouble, because someone like Daniel rarely let things lie. "Hey," she called gently, approaching him. "You've been noticing a lot, haven't you?" Daniel turned, surprised but not unfriendly. "I could say the same about you," he replied. "Ever get the feeling something's off?" His eyes were sharp, alive with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Marissa nodded slowly, weighing her words. "There's more going on here than anyone realizes. Be careful." Daniel's brow furrowed. "I think I know that. Last night, I saw someone. No, I think I heard something. Something that didn't make sense. And now, I'm starting to see patterns." Before Marissa could respond, a shadow fell over them. The captain's presence loomed, his dark uniform crisp and immaculately pressed. Halston's eyes scanned the deck, noting every movement, every glance. There was a subtle intensity in his gaze that froze Marissa mid-step. Daniel, oblivious to the scrutiny, continued, "I've been following the crew's patterns. The disappearances, the subtle tensions, it's not coincidence. Something's happening below deck, and I intend to find out what." The faintest smile touched Halston's lips. "Curiosity is a dangerous trait on a ship," he said smoothly, his voice carrying a calm that belied menace. "Sometimes it's safer to observe quietly." Daniel straightened, sensing the underlying threat. "Some truths are worth the risk," he replied, defiance threading through his tone. Halston's gaze lingered on him a moment longer. Then he turned sharply and walked away, leaving a chill that seemed to cling to Marissa and Daniel alike. Later, Marissa found Daniel in the observation lounge, reviewing his photos. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "You understand what's at stake here, don't you?" he asked, voice hushed. "Whoever this captain is, they won't let anyone expose them. I've seen the subtle control. I've seen the fear. People disappear and no one asks questions. This ship isn't what it seems." Marissa nodded, the weight of their shared understanding pressing down. "I know. Sofia told me everything last night. He's manipulative, controlling, dangerous. Anyone who knows too much is at risk." Daniel's expression hardened. "Then I need to act carefully. Quietly. But I can't ignore it." And that was the last conversation Marissa had with him. Hours later, Daniel was reported missing. A search of the decks and lower corridors revealed nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, not even a clue. Panic began to ripple among the crew and passengers. Whispers that had once been hushed now turned to murmurs of alarm. Marissa felt a cold, sinking dread. Daniel had become the second person aboard to vanish, and the pattern was unmistakable. The Ocean Majesty had shifted from a vessel of luxury to a floating cage, its corridors echoing with secrets and fear. And Marissa realized the cruel truth. She and Sofia were now entwined in a dangerous game, one that could end with them disappearing as well. As she sat in her cabin that evening, staring at the darkened water beyond the porthole, Marissa's thoughts raced. Daniel had known too much, and so would anyone else who dared to look too closely. The captain's hidden power and manipulations were now laid bare, and the ship itself seemed to pulse with menace. The vanishings had begun in earnest. An illusion of safety aboard the Ocean Majesty was gone. The night aboard the Ocean Majesty had a suffocating stillness. The waves lapped gently against the hull, deceptively calm after the storm had battered the ship just days before. Most passengers were asleep, lulled by the rhythm of the sea. But Marissa Kane could not rest. Her thoughts circled Daniel Reed's disappearance, Sofia's confessions, and the mounting evidence of Captain Halston's manipulations. Every shadow, every creak in the corridor felt like a threat. Marissa had decided to review her notes in her cabin, piecing together the events that had unfolded so far. She jotted down observations, whispered conversations, and letters that Sofia had shared. Each entry only deepened her understanding of the perilous web that Halston had spun, a network of control and fear that reached into every corner of the ship. A sudden knock at her door froze her. "Marissa?" A whisper that was almost swallowed by the ambient hum of the engines. She opened the door a crack and found Sofia, eyes wide and pale. He's looking for us," she said, voice barely audible. "He knows what we know. I think tonight might be dangerous." Before Marissa could respond, a sudden vibration ran through the floorboards, like the ship itself was shivering. Then a soft metallic click echoed from the hallway, followed by a low, deliberate footstep. Halston. Marissa's pulse spiked. She motioned for Sofia to stay low, and together they crept toward the adjoining lounge, moving silently past the rows of empty cabins. Each step felt magnified in the oppressive silence. Her mind raced, calculating every possibility, every escape route. They reached a maintenance hatch that Marissa had noticed earlier in her investigations, a narrow crawl space leading to service corridors often overlooked by passengers. Sofia's hand shook as she helped Marissa push it open. The cramped passage smelled of engine oil and damp steel. They crawled through the narrow space, hearts hammering, each muffled creak threatening to betray them. Emerging near the aft decks, they paused to listen. The corridor was empty. Marissa took a deep breath, the salty sea air stinging her lungs, and tried to steady her shaking hands. "She's gone," a voice whispered suddenly from behind. Marissa spun around. It wasn't Halston. It was another crew member, a young stewardess she hadn't noticed before. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Daniel, he's gone. And now, they've taken someone else." Marissa's stomach sank. "Who?" The stewardess shook her head. "I don't know. I just heard the alarms. A passenger, one of the newer guests. They vanished from the observation deck. No one saw anything. No one." A chill ran down Marissa's spine. The vanishings were no longer isolated incidents. They were escalating, targeting those who observed or questioned the captain's secrets. The Ocean Majesty had become a floating labyrinth of fear, and the invisible hand behind it seemed unstoppable. As she processed this, Marissa noticed movement from the shadows. Halston's silhouette appeared briefly in the corridor, a dark figure surveying the area. His presence radiated authority and menace, his calm demeanor making the threat all the more terrifying. He paused, as if sensing something, and then turned sharply, vanishing into another hallway. Marissa realized in the cruel calculus of the ship. Any misstep, any curiosity, any attempt to uncover the truth was punishable. The captain's affair had been the first layer of control. Now, the vanishings were the stakes, and the price of knowledge was fear, or worse, disappearance. Sofia's trembling voice brought her back. "We can't stay here. He'll come for us if we don't move. Marissa nodded, her resolve hardening. They needed a plan, a way to document the truth and survive. She grabbed her journal, flipping to the page where she had written Daniel's last observations. Every detail mattered now. Every clue could mean the difference between survival and joining the growing list of those who had vanished. As they slipped toward the stairwell to descend to a lower, less patrolled deck, the sound of the ship's engines thrummed through the floor. The gentle rocking that had once been comforting now felt like the heartbeat of a predator, echoing through the empty halls, reminding Marissa that the Ocean Majesty was not merely a ship. It was a cage, and they were trapped within it. That night, someone aboard the Ocean Majesty had vanished without a trace, and Marissa knew the next victim could be her. The sense of dread was suffocating, but with it came a steely determination. The story had to be uncovered. The truth had to surface. And she would not let fear silence her, no matter how dangerous the captain, no matter how clever the disappearances. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, dark and unknowable, reflecting the shadows that now haunted the ship. By morning, the Ocean Majesty had slowed, its engines now a steady hum beneath the crisp light of early dawn. Word of the recent vanishings had reached the authorities, and a small team of maritime investigators was boarding the ship at the next port. Passengers whispered nervously in the atrium, while crew members moved with unusually measured efficiency, their faces a careful mask of calm. Marissa watched from the railing above, notebook in hand, her mind spinning with questions, observations, and unease. The investigators were methodical, clipboard and camera in hand, asking passengers and crew alike about any unusual behavior or disturbances. Marissa observed them closely, noting how each word, each hesitation, revealed tension that went far beyond the superficial. There was no denying the pattern, vanishing subtle manipulation, and growing fear among both staff and passengers. Marissa approached the lead investigator, a stern woman with sharp eyes named Detective Clara Winslow. "Excuse me," Marissa said softly. "I've been observing some unusual activity on this ship. I think it may be connected to the captain. I have notes and—" Winslow raised a hand, her gaze piercing. "We're aware of the situation, Ms. Kane. Marissa Kane. Ms. Kane, we appreciate any insight, but please stay out of danger. The captain is still in command until this vessel reaches port. We'll need to interview the crew, and we'll consider your observations when appropriate." Despite the polite dismissal, Marissa felt a spark of reassurance. At least now, the investigation had official backing. But she also knew that Halston's control over the crew remained intact, and any open defiance could provoke him. The interviews began. Crew members were escorted one by one to the observation lounge, their faces pale, hands trembling, voices careful and deliberate. Marissa watched as subtle patterns emerged. Furtive glances, brief hesitation before speaking, a palpable tension that radiated fear of reprisal. Liam Torres was called forward. His answers were measured, though his eyes betrayed anxiety. Sofia's absence in the formal interviews did not escape Marissa's notice. She had stayed hidden, too afraid to appear, yet her story was vital. Detective Winslow moved efficiently, her questions probing without accusation, building a careful profile of the crew's operations. Marissa scribbled notes from the shadows, recording every slip of the tongue, every subtle reaction. Slowly, the web began to untangle. The vanishings were not random. They were the product of careful psychological manipulation, enforced through fear and secrecy. Halston, ever watchful, observed the proceedings from a distance. Marissa caught his brief nods to certain crew members, small signals that reminded her just how pervasive his influence remained. The investigation was underway, yet she could see that the captain was already calculating, already adapting, controlling the narrative without even speaking. By midday, several inconsistencies had been noted. Missing crew members, unexplained security footage gaps, and subtle contradictions in testimonies hinted at a deeper conspiracy. Marissa felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, the hidden forces aboard the ship were being systematically exposed, but she also realized the danger had escalated. The captain was not merely defensive. He was now aware that his secrets were at risk. Later, in a quiet corner of the lounge, Marissa confided in Liam. The investigation is a first step, but he's not stupid. He'll adapt, and anyone who pushes too hard could vanish next. Liam nodded, his jaw tight. We just have to be careful. Observe, document, survive. Marissa's thoughts drifted to Sofia. The stewardess had shared the truth, given the evidence, but remained in hiding. The investigation was a perfect opportunity to bring her testimony forward safely, but only if they could maneuver carefully. Every move now had consequences, and the ship itself seemed to pulse with silent threat. The Ocean Majesty's polished decks hiding shadows too deep to ignore. As the investigators continued their work, Marissa realized the stakes had never been higher. The captain's manipulations were coming to light, yet the danger of exposure now placed her and the remaining crew and passengers directly in the path of a predator who thrived on secrecy and control. By evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, casting the decks in muted gold, Marissa closed her notebook. The investigation had begun, but it was only the beginning. Halston's carefully constructed world was cracking, and the tension aboard the ship had reached a point where one misstep could have catastrophic consequences. Outside, the Ocean Majesty sailed on, serene and indifferent, while below, fear and truth collided in a delicate, deadly balance. The Ocean Majesty cut through the ocean with deceptive calm, its decks gleaming under the afternoon sun. Yet below the surface, tension simmered like magma ready to erupt. Marissa had spent hours compiling notes, cross-referencing Sofia's letters, Daniel's observations, and crew testimonies collected by Detective Winslow. Every word, every detail pointed to a single conclusion. Captain Edward Halston's control over the ship was not just manipulation. It was criminal, calculated, and deadly. Marissa met with Detective Winslow in the quiet of the observation lounge. Sofia was hidden nearby, ready to provide testimony once the timing was right. The detective's sharp eyes scanned Marissa's notes. If we confront him carefully, we can bring this to light without tipping him off too soon, Winslow said, her voice low but firm. We need evidence, witnesses, in the right moment. The plan was set. They would stage a routine crew briefing on the upper deck, where Halston would be present, and discreetly signal the crew to provide corroborating testimony. Marissa felt a surge of adrenaline. This was a culmination of days of fear, observation, and careful documentation. The stakes could not have been higher. As the officers assembled, Halston entered the room with his usual composed, authoritative stride. His eyes swept over the group, lingering just long enough on Marissa to remind her of the control he wielded. The crew tensed, subtle signals passing between them. Marissa noted the small signs, trembling hands, fleeting glances, hesitation before answering questions. They had all lived in fear of this moment. But now, the carefully hidden truth was about to surface. Detective Winslow began questioning the crew, her voice calm but incisive. Several crew members have reported unusual behavior, unexplained disappearances, and secretive relationships aboard this vessel. Can anyone provide details? A hush fell. Then, slowly, one by one, crew members began to speak, corroborating Sofia's story and Marissa's observations. The letters were presented, detailing the hidden affair and the manipulative language used by Halston to control and intimidate. Whispers turned into audible shock as evidence mounted. Vanished crew members, Daniel Reed's disappearance, and the psychological coercion that had ruled the ship for months. Halston's smile tightened, the polite mask slipping for the first time. He opened his mouth, but Winslow's steady gaze stopped him. Captain Halston, she said, voice low and precise, you are under investigation for multiple disappearances, abuse of authority, and endangering passengers and crew. The room held its breath. Halston's usual poise faltered as the crew members' testimonies peeled back the layers of his deception. Marissa watched, notebook in hand, heart racing. Every lie, every manipulation he had orchestrated was now exposed, the illusion of control shattered. Sofia stepped forward, trembling but resolute. I was part of it, she admitted, voice quivering. I was manipulated, but I want the truth to come out. I want to stop this before anyone else disappears. Her courage ignited a ripple of relief and tension among the crew. Halston's hands clenched, his jaw tight. You think this changes anything? He demanded, though his voice lacked its usual dominance. I've maintained order on this ship. Discipline is necessary. Marissa shook her head, feeling the weight of her resolve. Discipline is not fear, and control is not secrecy, she said. People have vanished, been silenced, or coerced. That ends now. The investigators moved efficiently, documenting every statement, photographing letters, and securing evidence. Halston was visibly cornered, his composure cracking under the weight of undeniable proof. For the first time, he was subject to the scrutiny he had always controlled. Outside, the sun reflected off the waves, a stark contrast of tension inside. The Ocean Majesty's polished decks had concealed manipulation, fear, and vanishings, but now the truth was unrelenting, exposing the captain for what he truly was. Marissa closed her notebook with a sense of finality. Justice had begun, not fully, but decisively. The crew's relief was palpable, and even Sofia exhaled deeply, her burden lightened by the courage to testify. The vanishings had been orchestrated by fear and secrecy, but the exposure of Halston's affair and manipulations had unraveled the web he had spun. As the investigation team prepared to secure Halston for questioning and ensure the safety of the remaining passengers and crew, Marissa allowed herself a moment to reflect. Months of observation, danger, and sleepless nights had led to this point. The truth at last had pierced the darkness. The Ocean Majesty sailed on, serene and indifferent to the human drama it had carried. But below deck, the atmosphere had shifted. Fear had been replaced with cautious hope. Secrets had been laid bare, and for the first time in months, the passengers and crew could breathe without watching every shadow. Marissa knew the road ahead would still be fraught with legal processes, testimonies, and emotional recovery, but one thing was certain. The captain's mask had been unmasked, and the story that had begun with whispers in the hallways had reached the light of day. The Ocean Majesty drifted gracefully under a setting sun, its silhouette cutting a serene line against the horizon. The storm of fear, secrecy, and manipulation that had haunted the ship for weeks had subsided, leaving behind a fragile calm. Passengers returned to their routines, hesitant but relieved, while the crew moved with careful confidence, freed from the oppressive weight of Halston's control. Yet for those who had been too close to the darkness, the echoes of the ordeal lingered, whispering reminders of what had been endured. Marissa stood on the upper deck, journal in hand, tracing the fading light across the rippling water. Her thoughts lingered on Sofia, who had courageously testified despite the fear that had gripped her for months. The young stewardess was now being guided toward counseling and support, her burden finally acknowledged and her autonomy restored. Marissa allowed herself a brief, quiet smile. Justice had begun, but the human cost of secrecy and manipulation was still present in every tense glance, every hesitant step aboard the ship. Detective Winslow moved along the promenade, ensuring the remaining evidence was secured and the crew fully debriefed. Halston had been escorted to the authorities, his mask stripped away, leaving only the man whose obsession with control had nearly destroyed lives. Marissa observed from a distance, noting the subtle tension in the captain's posture, a shadow of authority replaced by vulnerability. The exposure of his affair, his manipulations, and the vanishings had dismantled the carefully constructed illusion that had held the ship in a silent grip of fear. As night fell, the Ocean Majesty glowed softly, the ship's lights reflecting like fractured diamonds on the calm sea. Marissa wandered through the now quiet corridors she had once feared, feeling the absence of unseen eyes and whispered threats. Each room, each hall, carried memories of tension and vanished figures, yet now they also held traces of resilience, the courage of witnesses, the diligence of investigators, and the determination of one passenger unwilling to let truth remain hidden. She paused at the observation deck, looking out at the endless ocean. The waves seemed to carry stories of those lost, those silenced, and those who had survived. Marissa reflected on the psychological toll of the affair, the manipulation and the vanishings, how fear could control, how secrecy could destroy, and how courage, even in small acts, could shift the balance. Sofia joined her, quietly standing at her side. "It feels strange," she admitted. "The fear isn't gone completely, but it's lighter, like the ship itself is breathing again." Marissa nodded. "The echoes will always remain. Memories, scars, reminders, but at least the truth is out. People know now, and you've taken back control over your own life." They stood in silence, watching the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, the moon rose, casting a silvery path across the water. It was a symbol of continuity, of endurance, and of the subtle ways human resilience could shine even after darkness. Marissa's journal lay open at her feet, filled with observations, letters, confessions, and evidence. It was more than a record. It was a testament to the cost of uncovering hidden truths and the bravery required to face danger head-on. The Ocean Majesty had carried secrets, disappearances, and fear, but it now sailed as a vessel of revelations, where justice had begun to take root. As the ship moved steadily forward, Marissa felt the quiet satisfaction of the story concluded, but also the lingering awareness that human darkness could resurface in unexpected forms. She closed her journal, took a deep breath of the salt-tinged night air, and allowed herself a moment of peace. The Ocean Majesty was calm once more, but the echoes of fear and courage would remain, etched in memory like waves upon the sea. The night carried on, gentle and unthreatening, yet the story of the vanished, the manipulations, and the unmasking would linger far beyond the decks, an enduring reminder that truth, once uncovered, could illuminate even the darkest of waters. The Ocean Majesty drifted into port under a sky painted with the first light of dawn. The ship, once a floating labyrinth of fear and secrecy, now carried a cautious calm. The passengers disembarked with quiet relief, murmuring about the drama they had witnessed or only heard rumors of, unaware of the full scope of the danger that had lurked beneath the polished decks. Marissa stood at the rail, journal in hand, reflecting on the weeks of tension, disappearances, and revelations. She had documented every whisper, every confession, every subtle act of control, and now, as she prepared her final entry, the last log of the Ocean Majesty's harrowing voyage, she felt a sense of closure tempered by lingering unease. Sofia joined her silently, offering a tentative smile. "You think it's really over?" she asked, voice soft, still tinged with caution. Marissa glanced at the horizon, where the sun's rays kissed the ocean. "For now, the captain has been exposed, and the investigation continues. But some echoes, some shadows remain. The fear we felt, the secrets we uncovered, they don't vanish as easily as people do." Sofia nodded, letting the words settle. "I suppose we can't undo what happened, but at least we can move forward." Marissa opened her journal one last time, pen poised. She wrote of courage, fear, and the resilience required to face truths that others sought to hide. She recorded Halston's manipulations, the vanishings, and the careful steps taken to bring the captain to justice. Her hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility, the realization that this log was more than documentation. It was a testament to survival, to truth, and to the cost of uncovering what some wish will remain hidden. "Do you think people will understand?" Sofia asked quietly. "They'll have to," Marissa replied. "Stories like this don't fade. They ripple outward, like waves, reaching those who need to see the danger and the courage it takes to confront it." As the sun climbed higher, the Ocean Majesty's decks emptied, leaving only the quiet hum of the ship's engines and the soft whisper of the waves against the hull. Marissa closed her journal, the final log complete. She looked out over the sea, feeling a strange mix of relief, exhaustion, and vigilance. The journey had ended, but the echoes of fear, manipulation, and courage will remain etched in memory, reminders of the fragile line between safety and danger, truth and deception. And somewhere deep within the ship's corridors, the shadows that had once hidden secrets now receded, leaving a fragile light, one that spoke of endings, accountability, and the enduring power of truth. The last log was written. The story was told. But the Ocean Majesty would carry the echoes forever.